I'm
Okay,
going
thank you.
to, oh, thank you.
I'm good for now.
All right. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your report. I'm wondering if any of the people who are on your project team have opined on the minimum wage issue in public, in the media. If I were to Google all of your names, would I find articles written, papers written, opining in favor of raising the minimum wage?
Would you like to? Yeah.
So you come to it with a opinion, a point of view that you use the research to support, correct?
The Roy Wilkins Center does not take a position to endorse the minimum wages that are simulated here or reject it. We were simply tasked with simulating what the effects would be of this minimum wage.
How many of you have opined in favor of a minimum wage in journals or articles or papers of the people on the team?
Well, I can't speak to myself.
All of you? Basically.
No, just those two.
Just 2 of 4. Okay, I was really hoping we would get a study back that kind of showed us what the cost benefit was, how it would affect businesses. But when I see a report that basically says there's no negative to businesses at all, it's hard for me to consider the report completely unbiased. Was a tip credit, for example, used in your analysis with regard to how restaurants would function? I have a lot of restaurants in my ward, and a 5% increase in their expenses could be the difference between making it and not making it. So while 5% doesn't seem like a lot, and it's certainly portrayed here as no big deal because you say multiple times that the change in employment is not statistically significant, there's no negative to businesses if we do this, but have you actually spoken to businesses who have a margin of profit that is 2 or 3 or 4 or 5%, potentially increasing their costs by that amount could put them out of business? How did you look at that?
First, I would note that again the the increased operating cost that we discussed is also met with a 51% pass through of those costs to consumers. So again, those costs aren't entirely realized by the employer themselves. We also, again, are basing our simulation off of the current Minnesota minimum wage, which does not have a specialized tier for tipped workers. There are, however, areas across the nation that do choose to have a special tier of minimum wages for workers who earn tips. However, Minnesota is not one of those states. And so for our simulation, we assumed that the $12 and $15 minimum wages would employ a similar design, which would also then allow us to rely on historical changes within Minnesota for the basis of our findings, instead of only using national data.
Madam Chair, but in Minneapolis, we don't have the ability to determine whether or not state law changes to allow or not allow a tip credit. So we could be passing a minimum wage without implementing that, or we could be preempted by the state from implementing that, making servers paid $25 an hour in order to get the folks who really have a hard time, which are kitchen workers and bus people, those very hard to fill jobs that also, as you know, in our employment in our city, you can't even fill those jobs right now. So the market is deciding what the wage would be as a result of the fact you can't fill those jobs. So I don't know that we can change that. I think what maybe the reason why I'm kind of zoning out to your whole report is that all of your key findings essentially say, it's no big deal, do it. There won't be any effect. There's no effect on businesses. That's exactly what you say. Oh, and the amount that we're going to increase is so limited that it won't really have an effect, or you're going to pass it on to a consumer. But when you already are paying $6 for a single scoop ice cream cone, how much more are people going to be willing to pay? I mean, there is a breaking point at which people who even make $15 an hour I wouldn't even consider paying $6 for an ice cream cone. So I can't imagine low-wage workers saying that now they'll pay $7.50 to accommodate a 5% increase in wages, and that's what they would have to do. So I kind of feel like you've underestimated how this would affect businesses while overestimated all of the benefits, including this whole issue of food insecurity. I don't think you need to be an economist to realize that if people get paid more, they have more money and they have less food insecurity. I don't need to have an economics degree to figure that out.
So I would just say, to the extent that you are, I think there was a lot of opinion in there, so I just want to say, the opinion is the opinion, but if there are places to kind of clarify what the study findings are, please let us know. So,
Sure. So again, first, our simulated change in earnings is not just an increase of the wage rate, it's an increase in the quarterly earnings rate, which means that it could be possible for earners to have their hours cut in this data set. But regardless, we find even if there is a cut in hours, there's still an increase in earnings, and that is offset by a change in the minimum wage. If there were, for example, a large reduction in hours in response to a minimum wage, we could have found a negative effect on earnings if the cut in hours was greater than the increase in the wage rate. But that's not what was suggested by any of the simulations that we ran. Instead, we find an increase in earnings between 10 to 30%. What's more, the design of the simulation that we ran was designed based off of the current minimum wage policy in the rest of Minnesota, because this allows us then to use Minnesota as a basis for comparison for this minimum wage. So although the city council could not obviously run anything contrary to state law, there could be, of course, many ways that a minimum wage of $15 could be cut to have many tiers. However, the simulation that was asked of us was simply of a level of $12 and $15. And a part of that was we had to make assumptions with respect to the large and small firm wage rates. However, this is a function of the fact that Minnesota itself and that Minneapolis workers are currently facing those rates. So to simulate those changes, we would have to have a similar circumstance in 2021 by the end of the simulation. Oh, one other thing that, yes, we would mention is that the earnings and the restaurant price increase and the employment studies, which we used for the basis of our simulations, come from peer-reviewed articles that have been discussed nationally and are not just a matter of a single author's opinion, but these are indeed cited papers from across the country. And they're cited because they have particularly strong findings. They have the techniques that they use are designed to separate what changes happen in response to a minimum wage versus what changes happen throughout the industry already. Indeed, it's possible that there are other factors that would change the prices of the restaurant industry. These studies are able to zone in on the amount of those changes that are causally tied to changes in the minimum wage. But again, that's more of a question of how much of these changes are from the minimum wage versus how much are from other factors that are not necessarily a part of the minimum wage and are not the scope of our simulation.
thank you. Councilmember Frye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, generally speaking, an expert doesn't become an expert unless they've substantially studied a particular topic. And once you've substantially studied a particular topic and gained knowledge in it, you usually form an opinion. So in the field of minimum wage expertise, I think you have proponents and opponents of it over time. And I don't think that the fact that a couple of the individuals that researched the particular topic gained expertise, gained knowledge, and ultimately opined that in many instances a minimum wage increase is advantageous and beneficial should be
Pointed out.
it certainly can be pointed out, but I don't think that it should be conclusive of some sort of bias beyond the fact that the information has been gathered.